everyone, I'm Larry Cook, and I'm speaking with Margaret Clark, who is the great-granddaughter of our 19th President, Rutherford B. Hayes, and First Lady Lucy Hayes. Welcome, Margaret. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
Oh, great. Well, how are things in California?
I don't think you want to know. We're doing fine, but we have some issues with what's going on in Sacramento and things like that. So we could talk about that later, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. Listen. You know, we mentioned you're the great granddaughter of our 19th president. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm a born-again Christian, and what I love about Rutherford is that he was a Christian, and so was Lucy, and his quote was, "The best religion the world has ever had is the religion of Christ." And I read in a biography that he had daily prayers, reading a chapter of the Bible, kneeling for the Lord's Prayer. And in this COVID crisis that we're having, the reason we're doing this by Zoom instead of being at the wonderful Cherry Blossom Festival that we have every year is because of COVID. And I think people are realizing that something like this could take their life, and has unfortunately taken many lives. And it's a time to reflect on what your priorities are and what's going to happen for eternity if you do die. So I appreciate what President Hayes did for many people, and I do want to talk about that. And one of the things that I always try to tell people wonder, I have great-grandchildren, young great-grandchildren, and people say, well, how could my great-grandfather have been the president of the United States in 1876? And I believe the reason is my dad was 48 when I was born, and Burchard was in his late 40s when my dad Scott was born, and then Rutherford was in his late 40s when Burchard was born. So it kind of skipped 3 generations. So, you know, but I love my heritage, and I love what I've learned about Lucy and Rutherford.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you explained that, because it does seem a little hard to believe when and I'm sure for you in particular, when you tell people that you're the great-granddaughter of the 19th president. Before being president, Rutherford, then Rutherford Hayes, was quite a Civil War hero.
Yes.
And if you could talk a little bit about that, I think people would be interested in hearing about his time in the Civil War.
Yes, I was so taken, just really appreciative of what he did. Apparently he was wounded 5 times in the Civil War, and one time was his horse was shot out from under him. And he was very, very involved in fighting for the rights of African Americans and ending slavery. And I really think that's so important right now in these days. And I understand that, he was Major General. And one of the things that I appreciated, I think they wanted him to leave the battlefield and run for Congress. And he said, no way, basically. He said, anyone who would leave the battlefield and campaign should be scalped. We don't use that term anymore, but it was,
right.
That's how he felt about it. And I thought that was really good. He wasn't in it for the politics. He was in it for helping people. And I think one of the things that I try to live by also, but he did, was Proverbs 31:8, which says, stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. And in fighting that way, he was standing up for those people who could not stand up for themselves, and really felt it was important to do that. And I understand that Lucy even came out on the battlefield when they were fighting, and helped with wounded soldiers and things like that. And I understand their even young son, Joseph, apparently was infant son, and he died during that time. So they had a lot of heartache, but they were willing to sacrifice for helping other people.
Yes, definitely. And continued to make those sacrifices for the remainder of his life, really, through the presidency, and and beyond. Um, one little fact that you may or may not have known during the Civil War, William McKinley served under your great grandfather. And I even read a story about how when you mentioned Lucy visiting the camps, and I even had read a story at one time about then Private McKinley keeping the campfire going near Lucy to keep her warm throughout the night.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you know, I seldom think of that and think, wow, there were two future presidents in that camp, and wonder if either one of them knew, you know, or even thought at the time that they could be president.
Right.
So your great grandfather had a long political career before he became president. As you mentioned, he was put into Congress while he still was in the Army. And can you talk a little bit more about his political career beyond that?
Yes, well, one of the things that I noticed when he was campaigning for governor of Ohio, he was, one of his platforms was voting rights for Blacks. Because as you know, the end of the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments to the Constitution were passed, which gave the citizenship and voting rights. And he wanted to see that enforced and not just on paper. And I thought that was very important. He also defended refugee slaves. And when he was president, he appointed Frederick Douglass as Marshal of District of Columbia, and that the first Black person that was very famous. And I'm just so proud of those things that he did.
Oh, rightfully so. Yeah, absolutely. And you're in politics yourself, right? You got a little bit of that handed down from your great grandfather.
The DNA, I guess. I started out, and I've been on the Rosemead City Council now for 29 years, and we're a city that's south of Pasadena. I think pretty much everybody knows where the Rose Bowl is, so we're pretty close to that in California here. But I started out in politics, as I said, Proverbs 31:8, the standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, because we had a school district that wanted to take the homes in Rosemead to build a high school. And people would come to the meetings, school district meetings, and saying, I've lived in Rosemead all my life, please don't take my home. A lot of older people. And we didn't think that was right. We came up with a much better solution, and 2.5 years later, we were at every single school board meeting and in their face. And the win-win situation was there was a bill that would give money from the state to school districts that would build on to their existing schools. And so it was a win-win. They didn't have to take any homes, and yet they got a whole lot of building improvements for all of the whole district. But then after that, someone said, well, why don't you apply for the planning commission and council? I said, I didn't do that to climb the ladder in politics. I did it because it was the right thing to do. But one thing led to another, and I saw there were things that needed to be changed, so I did. And I was elected 29 years ago, and I joke with people, we don't have term limits. If you don't like me, vote me out. But one of the things that President Hayes said was, and I did quote that in politics, is he serves his party best who serves his country best. And I wrote a letter to the editor about that sometime when there was real partisan issues going, and I thought, why don't you do what President Hayes said to do and do the right thing? And my husband and I met at the church near UCLA. And so I got my teaching credential, and we have 8 wonderful kids, and they're all just wonderful citizens of this state and country. And so I homeschooled our kids because I have my teaching credential, and we were able to do that. And I've thought about during this COVID time, when people are at home and having to homeschool, and finding out that there are ways to do it and get your kids interested in learning a lot. And so my husband and I were talking about we did that way back, you know, some of the things that we're able to do. I was only the second woman on the council in Rosemead. And I'll never forget when I first got on, there'd been, the first one had been maybe 10 years earlier. So they were all gentlemen, and the mayor was saying, well, okay, we're going to vote on something. And he says, okay, gentlemen, please vote. And I'm going, wait, I'm not a gentleman. And then he realized that it was okay. It was funny, but it's been really interesting to see what happens. And I've really enjoyed it. There's a lot of issues out there that are important. So.
Well, I loved what you said, and I think you gave the proof that it is in your DNA from your great-grandfather when you said that that you didn't do what you did to climb the political ladder. You did what you did because it was the right thing to do, and subsequently you did climb the political ladder because of that. So, you know, I think that's proof right there that it's in your DNA, and I love that you said that. Getting back to politics and your great-grandfather, he was elected in the 1876 election, which in the history books is known to be the closest presidential political decision in history. And I know you have a neat little story that pertains to that, a family story, and I wonder if you could share that with us.
Yeah. Well, first of all, whenever there's been a close election, I think there's been 3 or 4 since Rutherfords election with the Electoral College. And so whenever it comes up, you know, I'm going, oh no, do we have to go through this again? But really, the election of Rutherford was almost apples and oranges if you're comparing the recent close elections, because what had happened was there were a lot of African Americans that were intimidated and were not able to vote, and violence and things like that. So when you say it was just one electoral vote, there was a lot of issues there that people were not allowed to vote. But what was I think you're referring to is my dad. You know how kids are, and they're kind of mean to each other in school, and so some of my dad's friends were jealous, and they'd say, oh, your grandpa only won the presidency by 1 vote. And so he would say, and your grandfather was what, a horse thief? that shut him up.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. I love that story because that is the perfect comeback. That is just perfect, you know. We're talking a little bit about family history and family stories, and those are the things that I just love to hear from the descendants that I interview. Another thing that I always ask is, in your opinion, what was one of the greatest achievements of your great-grandfather, not necessarily as president, but or even, in other words, the thing that you admired the most? And I think you already alluded to one thing with that you admired his Christianity. But I was just wondering if there's anything else that was handed down through the family or a personal opinion of yours.
Well, I think some of the things that played out where he's talking about standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. And he played out and lived out the golden rule where Jesus says, treat others the way you want to be treated. And one of the things, first of all, he ended the spoils system where there was so much bribery and giving good jobs and things to people that did what you want. And that still is today. It's not like but it was very corrupt back then. And I appreciate him doing that. He also did a proclamation to stop the whites from invading the Ute territory of Native Americans. And that's special to my heart because I have a new grandson, my granddaughter's husband would be my grandson-in-law, I guess you call it. And he is full native of Navajo. And so he and our granddaughter are planning to live on the reservation and help with improvements there and bringing Christianity, helping people get off addiction and things like that. So I really appreciate what he did there. He also went we had his his was the first presidential library in the whole nation. So
Sure.
we had the 100th anniversary. It's in Spiegel Grove near Fremont, Ohio. And 4 years ago, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the centennial. So all of our family went. It was fantastic. And so while we were there, they did the Terra State Community College named, they renamed the Skills Trade Center in honor of Rutherford B. Hayes. And I don't know if I can hold up this and show anybody, but this was a
Oh yeah.
one of the little, because it was hot back there.
Sure.
And he says, to make the boy equal to his fellows, let him be taught to make a living with the skilled labor of his hands. This is the cornerstone of American education. So I thought that was really, really interesting that they wanted to name that after him, because he knew it was important. Here's a picture of the college. And
Yes.
so we were able to do that. And then one of the other things I have this is a picture of the whole family there. I don't know if you can see that, but I mean, not our family. This is the whole Hayes descendants.
Sure.
But we had 40 of our family because we have 8 children. So do the math. But one of the things that I really enjoyed being back there was what he had done for Paraguay. They had a huge battle, and a lot of people were killed in the battle against Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. And they wanted to have land. And so he intervened and did it, was able to give them their land. And they are very much appreciative. So the ambassador, Rojas, was at the centennial. And that's a picture of me with him.
Nice.
Because they love him down there. I guess there's statues to Hayes and everything, because he saw how they were being mistreated, and he stepped in. So I appreciate that. He defended refugee slaves and wanted the voting rights for Blacks. I'm just looking at my notes here.
No, that's fine. Great.
And so those are the things that I really appreciate, that he lived out his Christian principles of treating others the way you want to be treated, and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. And I've tried to live that out in my political career. I don't like being called a politician. I hate that word, because that means you're doing stuff that's could be clandestine. But I call myself a public servant, because that's what we're here for. We're here to serve the people. So
nice. Well, again, it's in your DNA. We can certainly see that from what you're saying, and that's the public servant term is definitely sounds much nicer than politician. I agree with you there, definitely. And speaking of your great grandfather, on a personal note. And you alluded to this in some of the things that you said you admire from him, but the type of personality that he had seemed to be exactly what you just talked about. Being kind to others and being fair and honest, and I love to read the personalities of the presidents, and you when you read about them enough, you feel like you actually know them.
right.
And they sometimes have a different personality than what people think from just seeing their picture.
Right.
But is there anything else about his personality that you would like to mention?
I had something and I lost it. He was very, I know what I was going to say. He chose to have only one term of office, and he did keep that promise, which I do respect. But I have found with my public service, if you will, that you need to be on more than one term, because you need to build relationships with people so that they know they can trust you. And so what you say, they go to you and say, well, you know about this issue, I don't know that much, and I'll do that with other people that I trust. And so I personally wish that he had had a second term to get more done. But what he did do was very good, and I do appreciate that he kept his word. But that's just my experience, that when you have more time and build relationships, you can get more of the things that you think are important done.
Sure, understandable. And I agree with you there wholeheartedly on everything you just said. And I do admire your great grandfather for the fact that he carried through on that. You know, that wasn't something that he decided late into his presidency. He said it right at the inauguration, I believe.
Exactly.
And he did what he said. So
Yeah.
I do admire
The
that.
only problem with it is, again, is that people realize, oh, he's not going to be here after 4 years, so I don't really have to do what he wants. That's
Sure.
that's the downside of it, but that's just my opinion.
I think he felt that he could get more done if he didn't have to worry about
Well,
getting reelected.
that is an issue too. That's true.
Yeah, so that was kind of his take on it, but
Right.
you know, I think more people look at it the way you look at it, but that was, you know, that was his take. And the other thing that I am always interested in as a historian is how one thing can change history. And when you think about him not taking that second term, and then his successor, President Garfield, ended up being assassinated only about 4 months after the inauguration. It gives you goosebumps when you think
Yes,
about
it does. It
that.
does.
And I'm sure
Wow.
President Hayes was very upset about that, and I'm sure that same thought had to cross his mind, you know, had he been in there, and especially with President Garfield being also from Ohio.
Right.
You know,
Yes,
it was that had to hit very close to home
absolutely. Oh my goodness, how sad.
in many ways. Um, I also wanted to talk today a little bit about your great grandmother,
Oh yes.
Lucy, and I'm just going to kind of let you take that and just tell us a little bit or a lot about your
Okay.
great grandmother.
I really am so proud of her for standing up and not being willing to serve liquor in the White House. I have seen in my years so many people that have devastated their lives through alcohol addiction and now, of course, drug addiction. It's so sad. And I just think it's so important to the example that they gave. And I, in my own life, I don't touch alcohol at all. And when I first got on the council, I thought, oh, these people are going to think I'm weird. You know, they're going to have happy hour and I'm not going to do it. They don't care. My city manager would just say, oh, she'll have a Diet Coke instead. And nobody cares. And I was glad that I was able to do that, because I try to be an example to other people. And in the Bible, it actually talks about being a stumbling block to your brother. If you do things that may be okay for you to do, but he sees you do them because you're in a certain position, and then he can't handle his alcohol and he goes out and gets a DOI and kills somebody driving. So, you know, I've just seen that so much. And so, and I really appreciate that. And one of the things that I've read about was apparently the senators that wanted to have alcohol when they were in the White House, when they came to visit or whatever, they tried to sneak in oranges filled with alcohol. And unbeknownst to them, Rutherford knew about it, and he said to put gin flavored liquid in them. So they didn't, it wasn't gin, it was flavored. And, the joke was on them. They thought they were snookering him, and the joke was actually on them. I thought that was really funny. And she apparently, well, first of all, Lucy was the first college educated first lady. She went to Ohio Wesleyan, and I was very, very proud of her for that. And then she apparently invited the first African-American famous musician to perform in the White House. I thought that was really great. Then they instituted the Easter egg roll. And whenever anybody talks about that now, since, you know, it's a tradition at the White House, that they started that, and I was very happy about that too. So yes, I'm
Sure.
very She was a wonderful lady. And unfortunately, like I said, we have 8 children and never had any miscarriage or lost any. And we're so blessed by God for that. But they apparently had 8, but they lost 3. And that's so devastating. I don't know what that would be like. And I'm just so thankful I didn't have to experience that, but they certainly did. And of course, we all know how much better our medical system is these days. We can be so thankful. People are living a lot longer and everything, but the things that they had to go through back then is very sad. But they really looked to God, and he got them through it. But
Sure.
so yeah,
Sure.
very wonderful.
You mentioned early in our conversation here about your great grandmother too, how she used to visit the Civil War camps.
Yes.
And like Julia Grant, also,
Yes.
you know, she did that as well.
Right.
And you know, that just, again, I have so much respect for the first ladies, or they were not first ladies then, but
Right.
soon to be first ladies, that visited the Civil War camps and actually treated the wounded. I know Lucy did a lot of that.
That's right.
Helping out there at the camps and treating the wounded, and that's just, I just think that's remarkable when you read about that.
Yes.
And
What
your
bravery.
great grandmother
Oh
was
my
there.
goodness.
Yes,
Absolutely.
beyond the caring, the bravery is
Yes.
immense. Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely. And she came into being first lady right when there was beginning to be a lot of popularity around first ladies. Not that there wasn't before, because there was, but more the term first lady. A lot of the history books say that she was really the first lady to be referred to as such, because of a newspaper article that was written during the inauguration, which, if I'm not mistaken, by a female reporter, that wrote about the inauguration and termed her as First Lady of the Land in that newspaper article. And with her, it kind of stuck, you know, the term, and then it just got used more and more. So it's kind of a forerunner in that terminology as well.
Right.
The same thing with Lucy. Is there any other things that you would like to talk about, any family stories or personality or anything like that?
Well, I want to encourage anybody that's going to watch this that they can do the same thing. They can get involved in issues in their city, in their state, whatever, and stand up for them. I have one thing that happened in the mid-90s that was kind of like an epiphany for me, because to clean up the Air Resources Board in California wanted to put a gasoline additive into it. And it was MTBE, methyl tertiary butyl ether. And I was involved in getting, we helped form a groundwater cleanup agency to clean up the water that gets from pollution. And so we knew from the characteristics of MTBE that would get into the groundwater. And so I was able to argue with the League of Cities, with the Air Resources Board gentleman. And I said, this is going to get in the groundwater. And he said, oh no, we're just going to double line all the storage tanks. And it didn't happen. And if you Google it today, it's $30 billion to clean that up. It got virtually all of Santa Monica's water wells had to be shut down. And that was an epiphany for me, because that told me that the regulators aren't necessarily doing what's right. The right hand wasn't talking to the left hand. And $30 billion that could have helped the environment. One of my big issues is common sense environmental. And I'm on a lot of committees at the local and regional and state and federal level. And so that told me, we better be screaming and yelling. Don't just say, oh, they're important bureaucrats, they know what they're doing. Not necessarily. That was really a wake-up call for me. That is money that we're still paying for to get it out. And everybody, probably in all of your cities, you have abandoned gas stations. And the reason is nobody wants to buy them because you have to truck out the contaminated soil of the leaking tanks, and then you have to pay for it. And if it's ever, pollution ever gets down into the groundwater from your site that you bought, you have to pay for that. So that's why a lot of abandoned gas stations. So I'm just saying this to tell people that you can make a difference, and don't just assume that everybody that's in office is doing what's right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I loved what you said at the beginning of that. Anyone watching this can take our history as a lesson to get involved, just like your great grandfather and your great grandmother and you and have done. And again, public servant. That's the term, and that's great. I want to mention a couple other little things about your grandmother. I know she was the first one to use, first lady to use a telephone
that's
and
right. I
a
forgot to mention that.
typewriter. Typewriter also, I believe,
Isn't that amazing?
in the White House. So, and I believe that makes your great grandfather the first president to use a telephone as
Yes,
well
apparently so.
in the
It's
White
hard
House.
to believe that with all the technology we have these days.
Yes, and
Yeah,
you just think about that. They were probably as scared of that technology as we're scared of
exactly.
our technology sometimes, that
Exactly.
we're going to mess something up or whatever.
Right.
And the only other thing I wanted to mention was your great grandmother had quite a China service
Yes.
uh, at the White House. So you could talk a little bit about that if you'd like.
Yes,
What-
when we were able to go to Spiegel Grove, and I hope people will visit the Hayes Presidential Library in Spiegel Grove near Fremont, Ohio, and we were able to see the china, and each plate is different. It had animals and flowers and things, not just your standard 25 plates with the same thing on them. And very beautiful, very beautiful. And so you would be able to see all that. I love it. And I happen to have a carving set, apparently, that was used in the White House, a big carving set. So at Thanksgiving, we try to use that, cut the turkey.
Oh, very nice, very nice. You're using history there.
Yeah,
Everything you're
right,
doing,
right.
so that's very nice. I have a neat little story to share, if you don't mind,
Sure.
concerning Lucy's China service, and it's a story that comes from another First Lady. I was giving a presentation in Plains, Georgia, and Rosalyn Carter was in the audience. And I was speaking, one of the presidents I was speaking on was your great grandfather. And when I talked about him, Rosalyn raised her hand and she said, "I would like to tell a little story." I said, "Sure." And she mentioned about Lucy Hayes's China set and how the animals and the plants and all that were on it. And she said that every now and then they like to put the wild boar plate in Amy's dinner, at Amy's dinner site on the table.
Oh,
And that Amy would, she would
freak
kind of
out. Right?
freak out a little bit with looking at this wild boar that was looking back at her on
Oh my
at her
goodness.
plate setting at the dinner table. So I thought that was a really neat little story.
Oh, I love that. That is great. That is great.
And you spoke of going to Spiegel Grove. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. You did mention that it is the first presidential library, and it is a wonderful place. It's great there. I wanted to mention that, as you know, your picture is on the wall there, and on the big wall of genealogy
Mhm.
there. And so, but it is a wonderful place. We visited there on our way back from the Cherry Blossom Festival last year,
Oh,
and
good.
yeah,
Okay.
my wife and I, and they were so nice to us when they found out I was a presidential historian. They gave
Oh,
us a
yes.
private tour of the home, and they pulled some things out of the archives for us to look at, and very, very nice. And the staff is just excellent there.
That's great. Yes, we enjoyed it 4 years ago when we had the centennial and all of our kids went, and they have on the wall the charts of who you're descended from and all the kids and whatever. So I showed the kids and grandkids, there you are, you know, and I really appreciate all the genealogy they've done. They've done the research, and whenever a child is born in our family, we send the information and it gets out there, and they've really done a good job. So I hope people will visit and enjoy it, because it's really wonderful place.
It is. I would highly recommend it. And the furnishings in the residence are just phenomenal.
Yes. Yes.
And they have, as you know, they have the pictures there from, you know, from the time that when the Hayeses were there, and they have the exact, from a vase or a little table in the exact same spot there now as it was, you know, back when your great grandparents lived there. And it's just wonderful how they.
And another thing that I remembered is the Resolute Desk, the desk that is used in the White House now. Most of the recent presidents use it in the Oval Office, and it was given to Queen Victoria, from Queen Victoria. And
Right.
that desk was, I'm sure they didn't use the exact desk, but it was in that, and I can't remember the name of it. I should have looked it up before, but it was they made a film where in the drawer of the desk was hidden the, I don't know if have you seen that? Do you remember what we were talking about?
I don't think I've seen that
Yeah,
film. No.
yeah, it's it was really interesting, and it apparently it was filmed at George Washington's Mount Vernon estate. The archive under the tunnels were used there. That's where it was filmed, and then the desk was used as part of the solving the mystery. And I'll have to look.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting.
Sure.
But whenever I see a president, you know, sitting in the Oval Office, I say that desk has history in our family.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And again, I would say, you know, if anyone listening to this interview, if you get a chance to go to Spiegel Grove, you will just love it. It's just
Right.
wonderful there. I wanted to mention to you as we start to close here that your great grandfather has quite a special connection to me, and that he spoke in 1878, he spoke at the Wyoming Monument in Wyoming, Pennsylvania. And my wife and I were married there.
Oh.
And in 2013, I asked President Carter if he would come there and give a speech. And one of my things for getting him to come there was to tell him that 2 other presidents had been there, and Teddy Roosevelt had been there, and your great grandfather had been there. And so I have an original photo here, if you can see it, from.
Oh wow! Interesting.
That's your great grandfather brought a lot of his cabinet members with him.
Wow, that's him sitting in the middle of there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Correct.
He's yes, he's right here. And so that's an original picture from there. And the Wyoming Monument is it's a monument to Revolutionary War soldiers that were killed in the Battle of Wyoming, and they're actually buried under the monument there.
Wow.
And as I mentioned, my wife and I were married there, and then I got President Carter to come there and give a speech. So I feel a connection to your great grandfather there.
Right.
And one other thing I'll show you from my collection is I have this is a photo of your great grandfather, of course, but that's an original signature on the bottom. It's a clipped signature. Somebody would have clipped it from a letter. I framed it in with, you know, with the photo here.
Wow.
But I've really enjoyed talking to you, Margaret, and that you're so full of history. It's wonderful. I love how you talk about your great grandparents and how you appreciate the history that's in your family, and I thank you for that. And is there any other things that you would like to mention that I hadn't given you the chance to talk
Well,
about?
first of all, I just remembered it's The National Treasure, I believe, is the film. You might want to look that I was talking
Okay.
about. Okay.
Yes, I've
But
heard
when
of
you
that.
hold up the picture of Rutherford, when we were there for the centennial, they have a statue of him. And it was incredible. We have 4 sons and then 4 daughters. And our sons took pictures next to Rutherford, and how similar they look. It was interesting. In fact, I'll tell you another little anecdotal story. Our son Tim has a high forehead, just like Rutherford did. And his friends used to call him Forehead. And my son, we have a picture of Rutherford in our living room there. And our grandson, Joshua, came over one day and he says, "Is that Uncle Tim?" he sees the forehead. And we had to explain, no, not really, but the similarity is so interesting that I thought that was a funny story.
Well, that's wonderful.
But I've
Yes.
really enjoyed this. This has been great. I really appreciate you doing this, and it's just been a lot of fun.
Well, I appreciate it as well, and I know people are going to enjoy it when they watch this interview. And again, thank you so much for sharing your family's history, with everyone so that they can learn from it. And I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed it very much, and we'll definitely see you at the Cherry Blossom Festival
Yes.
next year. I know.
I'm willing,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Same here.
Okay.
Well, you have a nice weekend.
You too.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Appreciate it. All right.
Same
Bye-bye.
here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.